Michael Scott, Scotty Manphoto. I thought I'd talk a little bit about planning a photography trip and what all that entails. You know, I talk a lot about planning, and I think planning's super important in any landscape excursion. But specifically today, what I want to talk about is kind of some of the details of having a plan specifically for a photography trip. So depending on if your photography trip is an actual trip or maybe just a part of a family vacation, you're going to take some opportunistic shots, that might change things up a little bit. But if your trip is truly a photography-based trip, in other words, you're going on this trip specifically to capture images, then of course the time of year that you go is going to be based on when those images might yield the best results, the best conditions for those images. And one tip I would give you is, if at all possible, don't plan these trips on holidays and weekends, and try to avoid the touristy seasons, because I think you'll have better access to the images that you want to take, and you'll wind up with better results. Well, I think it goes without saying that research is a big part of planning. And what do I mean by research? And I would say this. So if you have an idea, an area that you want to go and you're going to take pictures, why do you have that idea? And usually it's because you've seen some images online and you thought, oh, wow, that's great, I want to capture that image. Or maybe it's an area that you're familiar with, or maybe it's a specific genre of landscape photography that you're looking to capture. And for example, I have a trip coming up in Arkansas, Ozark, that I'm planning on shooting some waterfalls and some other attractions. But you know, I've scoped out the area and I've researched it pretty well. And some things that I've used to research are Google Maps. But mainly, there's a lot of resources, but books are a good resource. And this particular one, I picked up and was able to find several locations and specific targeted areas that I want to go to. And then using other things like Google Earth to kind of zoom in on these areas and find the images that you're really wanting to capture. So research is just hands down a very important part of planning your trip. Well, no trip's going to be successful without having a route, an idea of where you want to go, and maps and having a plan for that, I think, are super important. So you want to chart out your course and where you're going to go. And if you have several shoots planned, you definitely want to chart that out on a map so that you've got the layout of where you're going to start and where you're going to finish. One thing I would say is, don't plan too many stops. I think a big mistake that I've made is having too many images lined up, and you're trying to scram to get all of those captured. And I think that having a couple, a base plan, an idea of some specific things that you want to capture, these 3 core images, this is what I'm out for. And then you can have some opportunistic shots too, and allow some time in your schedule to capture those. So I think, you know, I find it best to kind of have a bigger map and kind of pinpoint exactly where I want to go and really lay that out so that I have a really good idea of where I want to be and when I want to be there and how I'm going to get there. So I'd like to talk a little bit more on the planned locations and where you're going to go and kind of how you approach that. And depending on your photography and what type of photography you're doing and where that's at. For example, for me specifically, I'm going to be hiking in the Ozarks. And that's hiking, backpacking, and kind of some, you know, maybe driving around mountaintops and parking in certain areas. And all those things have to be kind of planned out ahead of time. And so what I typically do is I like to put that on a Google Earth's map. And I also like to put that on my GPS so that I have these parking locations specifically on my GPS, the trails mapped out, the to routes, the from routes, and all the scenic stops along the way. So I kind of plan that in my GPS and on my maps so that when I'm out there, and certainly in areas that I haven't been to before, you know, quite frankly, I'm not getting lost. I know where I'm at, and I've got a plan. So I think that's super important, especially if you're out and you're going to hike to locations and backpack to these areas. So you have all these locations planned, but how are you going to get to these locations, and where are you going to be based out of? So I think you have to think about whether that's a hotel or a campsite, a base camp, or you're going to be backpacking in. But I think it's important to have a kind of a base camp of where you're going to set up. I mean, if you're actually just going to go out and capture one image, as I've done many times, and maybe you're just going to park on the side of the road and backpack in, well, that's a fairly easy plan. But for this particular shoot, I have several locations lined up. So I have a kind of a base camp, a centralized camp set up to where I want to stage myself so I can get to these various images. I think one tip that I would give you is super important is that don't set your base camp in the area that's just the best camp for you to enjoy the evening. Although that's important, but I would say this: tend to set your base camp in the area that's where you need to be at to kind of minimize your minimize your travel times to your photo shoots, so you don't have to kind of run all over the place. So that's kind of what I've done on my map is, I've got my base camp set to where I've got easy access or easier access to the various images that I want to capture. So talk about prioritizing real quick. I've kind of prioritized my images based on, well, what I deem to be my favorite images, or at least the favorite locations that I want to go to. So, and I'll take my map and I'll kind of put those in priority. I kind of use some color codes and whatnot on my map to kind of figure out what's the highest priority, so that when I actually get out there and I arrive, I can focus on my priority images. And then there's opportunistic images or other images that I might want to capture that are maybe close or conveniently located. Maybe they're not as aesthetically pleasing or as dramatic of an image that I was looking for, but you truly never know. I mean, you're looking at a Google Earth image or a snapshot from a book. I mean, a lot of times when you get out there, these books and Google Earth just doesn't do justice to the image. So I think having a solid plan and just kind of keeping that in mind is important. Safety is always a concern, and I think that you can never be too prepared, but you can certainly be under-prepared. One of the main safety items that I like to bring with me is a satellite communicator. And no matter where I'm at, I can activate this in an emergency if I need help. But also for more convenience, I go to areas often where there's no cell phone signal. And using my satellite communicator, I can kind of link that up with my phone. And you can do it right on the device, actually. But I can send texts and view maps and weather also. And I think that's also important. So that satellite communicator is a very big, and super important part of my kit. Another thing you might want to consider, a small first aid kit. Things happen out there, so it's best to be prepared. But depending on the type of year that you're going, you might be traveling during a hunting season, and I know there's hunting in the Ozarks is pretty popular. So just having a reflective vest is something to consider and important to have in your bag, and lightweight too. It doesn't take a lot, even if you're backpacking in. But you can always wear it too. But that's another thing. And then, of course, bug spray and things like bear spray. If you're hiking to areas where bears are common, there's no sense in being unprepared. So these things are super important. So safety first. So another thing to consider is, what are you going to eat and drink on this trip? And I think whether you're backpacking in or car camping, you have to know where you're going and what's available in that area. And certainly, so I'm somewhat familiar with this area. I've been here a few times, so I know what I'm in for. And I know that I'm going to travel quite far to get to civilization. So being prepared with water and what water do you have access to if you're backpacking in, and are you going to filter your water? Are you going to carry water in? So all those things are consideration in making sure that you have everything that you need to have the availability of the water that you need to have. So, and then what kind of food are you going to eat? Are you going to cook? Are you going to, maybe use dehydrated meals? And those are things to consider as well, because I'll be honest with you, on these photo shoots, I like to make sure that my time is best spent capturing images and not cooking meals and other things. So I tend to use dehydrated meals, and I will carry in water, and I'll always make sure that I have water available in my vehicle. But I also carry a filter kit too, Life Straw, just to make sure that that I'm not in a situation where I don't have water. So having water and meals and having a good plan for that is something to really think about, and just nothing to make light over. So yeah, super important. So talking about having those meals, and I don't like to cook and I want to focus on the photography. Another thing to consider is eliminating distractions, and I don't bring my computer on these trips because I don't want to process images while I should be thinking about capturing images. And although there's nothing wrong with that, and I think there are some advantages to having your computer and kind of looking at your images and thinking, wow, that's great, that's not so great, let me go back and recapture that. But I think it's often more of a distraction than anything, and I find myself kind of focusing on that rather than on my plan and my images that I'm trying to capture. So I think, just take the best image that you can while you're there, and then worry about processing them later. So another thing to consider is weather, and we can't always just cancel our trip because of bad weather. So you have to have an alternative plan, a weather plan. And maybe you weren't planning on capturing images in the rain, but you might just be doing that. So, and if you cancel your trip, great, but a lot of times you can't do that. Tickets have been bought, plans have been made. So just having a few extra things in your kit might really help you out, like having some rain gear that maybe you weren't planning on shooting in the rain, but nevertheless, opportunistic photos come up all the time. And in fact, I captured some lightning images that I was really happy with. And it certainly wasn't in the plan for that trip, but those were the conditions that I was dealt, and I had to deal with it. So I think that having a plan for that is important to keep in mind. So just think about weather and have some type of a wet weather plan, and think about how you're gonna do that should the weather come. So yeah. Well, the last thing I want to mention is managing expectations. And I think that many times, and I'm certainly a victim of this as much as anybody, but we have these expectations, these grandiose ideas, and these award-winning images we're going to capture. And let's just be realistic. If you're planning on 5 stops and you're planning on 5 super excellent award-winning images, you can just plan on failure. I mean, really and truly, have a positive attitude, have a good plan, but be realistic. Have a realistic expectation. I think that helps things move along, and try to remember why you're out there in the beginning. Have fun, enjoy yourself, capture some great images, but be realistic. And you know what? Having 5 shots planned and coming away with 1, I would take 1 good image, preferably 1 award-winning image, but 1 good image, and I would be happy. Really, but you may come away with no good images, and I think you have to be prepared for that mentally. So that's just something to keep in mind. So expectations. Well, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and end the video, but hey, I hope you got something out of this. I know planning is not always an exciting topic, but it is super important to keep in mind. And I think that, at least for me, I've gotten better results by planning than not planning. But that certainly doesn't mean that I couldn't grab my camera right now and head out, go to the lake, and capture an award winner, because you can. But hey, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing. And drop me a comment. Let me know what you thought. And as always, if I don't see you down the road, maybe I'll see you on the trail.